This story holds a secret that the state tried to erase. If you stay until the end, you will understand why. If you want to receive the next chapters automatically, subscribe now. Now, take a deep breath and listen. The world did not end in flames nor in silence. It was reorganized with method, patience, and technical language. No siren announced the end. No sky fell over the cities. The change came like an administrative update applied to the very definition of humanity. They called it genetic correction, but what they really corrected was the right to exist. The epidemic emerged discreetly. Small anomalies began to appear in routine exams, mutations that did not follow known patterns, unpredictable biological responses to common stimuli. At first, doctors minimized it. Then the numbers grew. Statistics replaced names. Graphs began to decide human destinies. The government reacted with a speed that seemed like efficiency, but hid old planning. Scientific committees were convened, emergency protocols approved, speeches prepared with carefully chosen words. They spoke of preservation of the species, of difficult choices, of historical responsibility. They never spoke of sacrifice. They never said who would pay the price for these decisions. That was how the population was officially divided: stable and variance. Two simple terms, easy to repeat, easy to accept. The stable represented continuity, predictability, and statistical security. The variance carried spontaneous mutations, genetic irregularities, and possibilities that escaped complete institutional control. The official language made a point of being clean. There were no insults nor declared hatred. Everything was described as technical necessity. People stopped being people and became biological data. The human body turned into an administrative battlefield regulated by rules, reports, and permanent digital authorizations. To ensure the application of this new order, the purity patrols emerged. They dressed in white, used medical symbols, and spoke in a calm tone. They did not shout nor threaten. They merely executed standardized procedures: identify, contain, correct. The word correction was repeated until it lost any trace of explicit violence. Cities adapted quickly. Verification gates appeared in schools, stations, hospitals, and public offices. A drop of blood decided access to transport, work, and housing. Those who passed moved forward without thinking. Those who failed were led out of public view, often without understandable explanations. Fear taught people to look at the ground. Conversations became short. Questions became dangerous. Most learned that surviving meant not standing out, not drawing attention, not being different. Elias Varn observed everything with restless attention. A biohacker since youth, not out of romantic rebellion, but out of obsessive curiosity. He had always believed that systems said more by what they hid than by what they showed. He grew up dismantling equipment, questioning protocols, and cross-referencing information that should not talk to each other. When genetic tests became mandatory, Elias was not surprised. He had already expected that. What he did not expect was the amount of data sealed, erased, or classified as irrelevant. That was not administrative carelessness. It was a deliberate political choice. During long nights, Elias cross-checked discarded medical records, analyzed regional outbreaks, and compared survival rates. Something did not fit the official models. The variants, described as fragile and unstable, were not dying as predicted. In some regions, they resisted better than the stable themselves. In highly contaminated areas, where stable bodies showed severe failures, Variant bodies adapted. They created new immune responses, not foreseen in the manuals. It was not genetic degeneration, it was accelerated and silent adaptation. The definitive confirmation came from a file buried under layers of state cryptography, Project Ypsilon, a study closed without public disclosure. The data were too clear to be ignored. The variants possessed natural immunity to the genetic epidemic. More than that, their code could serve as the basis for a real universal cure. The state knew from the beginning. The decision taken was not scientific, it was political. Revealing the truth would destroy the narrative of purity. Admitting that the different was the solution would dismantle the entire newly built control system. So they chose silence, then systematic and progressive elimination. When Elias tried to extract the data from the closed system, the alert triggered immediately. His name was included on the crimson list, execution authorized, total correction, without public trial, without right to formal defense or possible appeal. He did not try to flee. He knew it would be useless. The system was faster, broader, and more attentive. Instead, he fragmented the information. He spread incomplete copies across forgotten networks, abandoned forums, and old servers. He did not seek personal recognition. He sought persistence of the truth. The purity patrols arrived at dawn. The apartment was silent. Light passed through the blinds and drew precise lines on the floor. There was no physical resistance, only the mechanical reading of protocols and cold digital authorizations. During containment, one of the agents hesitated for an almost imperceptible instant. The scanner indicated something unexpected in Elias's genetic code, a mild old mutation never corrected, a detail that turned the agent into an accomplice without prior notice. He remained silent. Elias was taken to the Purification Center, a complex outside official maps, without windows, without civil records, without accessible history. There, thousands had passed. Officially, no one existed after that place. While waiting, Elias heard voices through the walls, not screams, but broken whispers. People realizing too late that they had never been sick, that they had been classified, not cured, that science had been used as a moral sentence. The system depended on the idea of acceptability. It needed science to justify violence. It needed to turn cold graphs into definitive and irreversible sentences to maintain the established order. Then something began to fail, not the machines, but the conceptual model. Too many variants surviving where they should not, too much data leaking through digital fissures, reality refusing the official discourse with silent insistence. At the final moment, when the procedure was initiated, the central system entered partial collapse. Conflicting alerts appeared. Automatic decisions were locked. For the first time since the implementation of the red code, the machine hesitated before the truth. Elias smiled. Perhaps he would not live to see the outcome of that story. Perhaps his name would be erased like so many others before him. But he knew that the truth, once revealed, could not be completely eliminated. There would always be someone willing to look beyond imposed purity. Outside, the cities remained silent, but the idea of purity was beginning to crack slowly. And when purity falls, the control falls with it. The red code remained active, but it was no longer absolute. Some stories are made to pass, others to stay. If this one stayed with you, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video. From that day on, the Purification Center stopped being only a final destination and began to function as a point of convergence. People arrived in silence, but ideas began to circulate invisibly. Each variant that resisted the protocols fed a contradiction impossible to ignore. The system had been created to be perfect, and perfections do not tolerate exceptions. Even so, they appeared. Elias understood this better than anyone. Even isolated, he perceived that the true collapse would not come from explosions or armed revolts, but from the simple persistence of truth. The state could erase names, but could not eliminate patterns when they repeated on a large scale. Each body that survived was an unanswered question. Inside the center, technicians discussed inconsistent reports. The numbers no longer obeyed predictions. Protocols needed to be rewritten almost daily. Science, used as a tool of control, began to reveal ethical fissures that no committee could completely seal. Outside, rumors emerged diffusely. Health workers commented in low voices. Data analysts noticed discrepancies. Small leaks appeared and disappeared from the network before being fully erased. Enough to generate doubt, never enough to generate consensus. Fear, which had previously kept everything in order, began to turn into distrust. Stable people started to question their own exams. Some suspected that perhaps they also carried undetected mutations. The line that separated acceptable and disposable became more fragile each day. The state responded by reinforcing the narrative. New statements, new campaigns, new promises of security, but excessive repetition exposed the fragility of the discourse. When a truth needs to be reaffirmed all the time, it is because it no longer sustains itself alone. Within the patrols, the effect was even deeper. Agents trained to obey protocols began to face silent dilemmas. Each genetic reading carried with it the possibility of a moral choice not foreseen in the manuals. Ignore a datum, alter a record, pretend not to see. These small human failures were not planned, but they accumulated. The system depended on absolute obedience, and doubt was its greatest enemy. A single hesitation could compromise an entire chain of automatic decisions. Elias, even confined, knew this. His bet had never been the immediate destruction of the regime, but the slow erosion of its legitimacy. The red code needed to appear inevitable. It was enough to prove that it was not. Over time, some variants began to disappear from the radar without explanation. They had not been corrected nor eliminated. They simply no longer appeared in active records. Someone, somewhere, was diverting routes, altering destinations, creating breaches. The system reacted too late. Audits were initiated but met internal resistance. Departments accused one another. Institutional trust dissolved silently. When no one trusts anyone, no structure remains stable. Elias was removed from isolation weeks later, not out of mercy, but out of necessity. Scientists wanted answers. They needed to understand why the model failed. They needed to understand what they had decided to eliminate. He did not cooperate out of revolt, but out of clarity. He explained patiently. He showed data. He demonstrated patterns. He spoke of adaptation, not defect, of diversity, not threat. His words were not ideological, they were technical, and precisely because of that, dangerous. Some listened, others pretended to listen, but no one managed to ignore it completely. The discourse of purity demanded extreme simplification. The reality presented by Elias was too complex to be erased easily. Little by little, the term variant began to lose its negative weight in certain circles. It began to be discussed as possibility, not as error, as future, not as failure. This never reached official broadcasts, but spread in private conversations. The red code remained active, but now functioned more by inertia than by conviction. It was applied because it had always been applied. It was maintained because dismantling it would require admitting historical guilt. In the end, there was no public announcement of collapse. There was no apology nor immediate official revision. The system simply began to change name, form, justification. Purity gave way to expanded stability. Correction turned into monitoring. Elias did not see the new world fully born, but he saw enough to know that the truth had survived. Absolute control demands perfect silence, and that never existed. The world moved forward, marked by invisible scars, and humanity, for the first time in a long while, was forced to face an essential question: who decides what it means to be acceptable? The answer did not come from the state. It came from the persistence of those who never fully fit. Some stories end when they seem to end. Others continue because they refuse to disappear. From that point on, the story did not advance in a straight line. It spread. What had once been a single, isolated biohacker became a diffuse symbol, impossible to capture. People who had never heard the name Elias began to repeat ideas he had formulated, not as a manifesto, but as collective intuition. Something was wrong, and many began to feel it in their own bodies. In peripheral neighborhoods, improvised clinics emerged to review old exams. Doctors, tired of institutional silence, began to compare results outside official systems. They discovered patterns similar to those Elias had seen: small mutations associated with greater resistance, better recovery, unexpected adaptation. None of this appeared in public reports. Trust in the Purity Patrol began to wear down, not openly, but subtly. People obeyed less quickly, questioned more. One extra second before extending an arm for blood collection, a distrustful look when seeing the white uniforms. Control still existed, but it was no longer absolute. Within the government, tension grew. Different wings disagreed about the next steps. Some defended total repression. Others suggested discrete adjustments to avoid social rupture. Science, once used as a moral shield, began to divide its own operators. Previously sealed files began to circulate in incomplete versions, never enough to prove everything, but enough to raise persistent suspicions. Independent newspapers published ambiguous analyses. Influencers commented on personal cases. The official narrative had to compete with real stories. The word variant lost strength as an insult. In some circles, it became identity. People began to recognize themselves in it, not as error, but as legitimate difference. The state tried to react with disinformation campaigns, but found a public less docile than before. The turning point was not a single event, it was an accumulation. Small human decisions, added over time, eroded the base of the red code. Each agent who hesitated, each doctor who compared data, each citizen who questioned in silence. When they finally announced a revision of the protocol, they did so with vague words. They did not admit guilt. They did not recognize victims. They merely updated terms. Purity gave way to expanded compatibility. Correction turned into continuous monitoring. They changed the names to save the structure, but something had been lost forever: moral authority. Once broken, it cannot be rebuilt with new slogans. The state continued to exist, but it was no longer the only source of acceptable truth. The world entered an unstable, ambiguous, dangerous phase, without easy certainties, without simple divisions, but also without the false comfort of blind obedience. And perhaps that was Elias's true legacy, not an immediate revolution, but the definitive breaking of the illusion of purity. The future would not be clean. It would be diverse, and it would have to learn to live with that.